we have some news about one of our endless wars to discuss here. The U.S. reached an agreement with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And, you know, we don't know all the specifics, but it's some sort of agreement about our withdrawal. And I'm sure that the Democrats are going to try to use this to bash Trump. It is on the bottom of the list of stuff I would go after Trump for. Because if the real heart of it is let's get out of Afghanistan, then that's good. That's good. Now, my only criticism is a tepid criticism, and that criticism is you don't need a deal with the Taliban to get out of Afghanistan. You could just get out of Afghanistan. Just get out. Just get out. You don't need a deal with them. You don't need to talk to them. You don't need to negotiate with them. You don't need to do anything. Just get out. I mean, that should be relatively obvious. The whole reason we initially went into Afghanistan was we have to get Al-Qaeda and we have to get Osama bin Laden because he attacked us on 9/11. Well, declare victory and come home. According to our own intelligence agencies, as of like 5 years ago, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan, and Osama bin Laden is dead. And we didn't even get him in Afghanistan. We got him in Pakistan. So get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. So that's my only criticism. But it's going to be gross to see, because I already read some of the responses just on Twitter from like the donut emoji type people on Twitter. And they're like trying to burn Trump for talking to the Taliban and getting out of Afghanistan. When again, to me, that's at the bottom of the list. As long as we're getting out, I'm happy with that. Now, but I also should say, we don't even really know if we're getting out, because how many times has he done this before? He did this. I gave him credit, you know, it was probably a year ago when he did the whole thing of, it's official. He tweeted one day, like, it's official. We're pulling out of Afghanistan. I'm doing the order now. And then we just didn't get out. And if anything, there was an increase in troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he does this a lot, where he does like the anti-war head fakes, and then behind the scenes, the wheels of the military-industrial complex turn, and they basically say like, that's a good one. And like whoever it is, the Pentagon, the generals, the CIA, the intelligence agencies, they're all just like, anyway, so we're going to go ahead and not do the thing you just said we're going to do. And he's like, wow, tremendous. I don't know. How many times has Trump said, like, and then a general walked in. It was amazing. It was one of the most incredible things you've seen. Finely pressed suit, wearing all of his general patches and whatnot. And he looked like he was straight out of Central Casting. Square jaw, straight out of Central Casting, folks. He said that so many times. So in other words, what that means is, even though Trump's instincts are, yeah, let's get out, the second some dude who looks like semi-official walks in and tells him we're not going to do that, he's like, okay, who am I to disagree with you? It's not like I'm the president or anything. So, don't give him credit yet as to getting out, because he's done this before and then we just didn't get out. So keep that in mind. Now, but that's not actually the biggest part of the story here that I wanted to talk about. The story coming out of Afghanistan that really made me go, holy shnikes, is this. Daily Beast says, large U.S. and international contractors working on construction projects in Afghanistan allegedly paid the Taliban for security services, which funded the insurgency's attacks on U.S. troops. We learned this because there's a lawsuit that's filed by the families of 143 American troops and contractors who were killed or wounded in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2017. Let's repeat that. U.S. contractors working on construction projects in Afghanistan paid the Taliban for security services, and then the Taliban used that money to turn around and attack U.S. troops. Now do you see why people talk about the military-industrial complex? Now do you see why Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican president, gave us a dire warning about it? So the reason why the contractors are there is because it's incredibly lucrative to be there. And these contractors are getting sweet, sweet government cash. And, you know, as we learn from the Cigar Report and others, there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse. There's like trillions of dollars missing for all of our, you know, foreign wars. Now, that money didn't just disappear. That money is making certain people very, very rich. So if you're one of those people who's getting very, very rich, this is a minor inconvenience. Like, oh, so I have to give the Taliban a cut of our money to keep the gravy train flowing. Well, no problem at all, Taliban. Here's a check. Here's some cash. And then the Taliban uses those funds to turn around and attack U.S. troops. So the Taliban, funded by the U.S., is attacking the U.S. That sounds very similar to like every, previous war we've been involved in. That's exactly what happened in Afghanistan when years prior, when we funded and armed the Mujahideen, including Osama bin Laden, and they used the money and the funds to attack the Soviet Union, and then when the Soviet Union got out of Afghanistan, they turned around and attacked us. This is the same thing. And make no mistake about it, the reason why these contractors were willing to do it is because they're getting very rich. And so for them, they don't care how many dead lives happen as a result of them funding the Taliban and propping up the Taliban. They don't care. They're getting rich. They don't care. They don't care. Sacrifice a few contractors, sacrifice a few U.S. soldiers. What am I going to do? It's par for the course. This is business as usual. This is, it's such a clear example of why you can't have private contractors and for-profit industries involved in war. You just can't have it. It's the same thing for prisons. Everybody understood for all of history, like, oh, there's certain things you got to keep out of the private sector. Certain things, profit motive is just, it doesn't work with. One of those things is prisons, because you don't want to incentivize your country to lock more and more people up because somebody's getting rich over it. Prisons are a thing that's necessary in a society, but it should be tax funded and it shouldn't be incentivized beyond that which is absolutely necessary. As soon as you introduce the profit motive, then there's a movement and there are lobbyists to try to get more people locked up for things that shouldn't be crimes. This is where three strikes laws came from. Same thing with war. You can't have like private mercenary armies like Blackwater, for example, because then who are they, accountable to? Who are they accountable to? You have a private group with weapons in a foreign land, and they're a for-profit group. Do you not see how this can go wrong? Do you not see how also, by the way, it breeded resentment between U.S. troops and Blackwater because U.S. troops were paid less? Blackwater people were paid with tax money, but paid more, and they weren't subject to the same rules of war? Do you not see the problem here? Private mercenary armies, who are they accountable to? Let's say the U.S. says, okay, no more Blackwater, we're not going to pay any more mercenary armies. What's to stop the head of a mercenary army from going to a different country and getting paid from them to turn their guns back on us? Nothing. Because, again, this gets back to there's a problem with certain things being, for profit, certain things being private industry. So when you have private industry rebuilding a country that we destroyed, well, now you're incentivizing private industry to squeeze every little penny out of the U.S. taxpayer because they want to make as much money as possible. And so it doesn't matter. They'll cut corners. This is what we learned in Iraq, how they were, I forget I think it was KBR or Halliburton. They were doing shoddy electrical for U.S. camps overseas, and people were dying. They were getting electrocuted in the shower. Why? Because they were cutting corners when they were doing the electrical at these buildings. Why? Because they're trying to eke out every penny. There were stories of if you drink a can of Coke in Iraq at the height of the Iraq War, the can of Coke cost over $20. The taxpayer was charged over $20 for it, for a can of Coke. Why? Because those companies were getting massively rich. The government wasn't going to stop them. Dick Cheney was in bed with Halliburton. He got an exit bonus of hundreds of millions of dollars when he left Halliburton. And then, wow, look at that. Dick Cheney's totally fine with the taxpayer being billed over $20 for a can of Coke for a soldier in Iraq. War is a racket, like Smedley Butler said. War is a racket. That's hilarious. War is a racket, just like Smedley Butler said, where it turns out that a lot of people, or actually it's not a lot, it's a small number of people, are getting very, very rich off of it. So they want to keep that gravy train flowing. And so that's how you get a situation like I just described to you, because you'd look at that and go, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. U.S. contractors are paying the Taliban, and the Taliban are using those funds to hurt U.S. contractors and soldiers. What? Why would they do that? Because they're getting rich from being there in the first place. Guys, we shouldn't be in the business of nation building in the first place. Why are we in the business of nation building? Why are we there? Why are we in Afghanistan building anything? Why are we in Iraq building anything? We shouldn't be. I mean, listen, we shouldn't have gone into these countries in the first place, but certainly after we went in, okay, you said your mission was to get Saddam Hussein and get Osama bin Laden. Those missions have been donezo for a long time. Why are you still there? Because the military-industrial complex is cranking out a lot of money from us being there. And there's some people getting very, very rich off these conflicts. And that's why we're still there. And also, by the way, there's oil wealth in Iraq and there's mineral wealth in Afghanistan, trillions of dollars, respectively. And we want to get our hands on that. So that's what it really comes down to. The oil wealth, the mineral wealth, and the military-industrial complex making a tremendous amount of money to the point where it's gotten this absurd. U.S. and international contractors working on construction projects in Afghanistan. It shouldn't be there in the first place, shouldn't be private contractors in the first place. But they're there. And so, take some U.S. tax money and pay the Taliban for protection? By the way, I don't know the details of that either. Like, was the Taliban acting like the mafia acts? Listen, you might want to pay us for some protection because we would hate it if something happened to your business now, wouldn't we? So maybe they were acting like the mafia. Or, guys, there actually is a legitimate chance, and I'm not kidding about this, that the Taliban was like, no, seriously, you're in a region that we control, and there's a chance that Afghanistan warlords are going to come and try to attack you, and we will provide protection if you pay us. That is absolutely possible. Now, you might say, come on, Kyle, it's more likely the mafia scenario. Could be the mafia scenario. But it also is possible. Just so everybody knows, and this is on the record, we've covered the stories. U.S. allies in Afghanistan had child sex slaves. When U.S. soldiers tried to report that to higher-ups, they were discharged from the military. To be fair, I don't know if it was dishonorably discharged or honorably discharged. But when people tried to blow the whistle and said, oh my God, we're allies with this warlord who's supposed to help us in the fight against the Taliban, and he's got a child literally chained to his bed and I saw it, higher-ups were like, but that's www.shh.com, that's our ally. Don't rock the boat. Don't shake things up. We need that guy. Oh, do we? We're there to protect the civilian population, unless you're a child getting raped, in which case, that's our ally and our friend, and we're not going to say anything about it. So, but the war is so messy that in some instances, we're aligned with warlords to fight the Taliban, and it's certainly conceivable, just like the mess in Syria, where we were on both sides at the same time, certainly possible we were also paying the Taliban to protect us from other warlords. That's certainly possible. I mean, again, this is the story, famous LA Times story from 3 years ago, where we learned that CIA-backed rebels in Syria were fighting Pentagon-backed rebels. So we were funding and arming both sides of a conflict. I mean, this is what we're talking about here. And again, you might think, well, how the hell could it have gotten to this point where everything's such a mess? And my response to that is, because the real goal is the military-industrial complex and the profit and the money-making. So if that's the real goal, everything else is just noise. Whatever happens, happens. You got to pay the Taliban a cut so you can keep getting rich? Fine. That's what they do. So that's how messed up the situation is, just so everybody knows. And again, I know I make this point a lot on this show, but I do it for a reason, because it's super important. Go ahead, turn on CNN, turn on MSNBC, turn on Fox News, see how many people are talking about this amazing story that I just told you about. You're not going to hear many people talk about it. You're not going to hear them talk about it, because the media has this complex where they always default to the worst possible anti-Trump arguments, and they always default to, like, the least interesting news. There's a lot of really fascinating, interesting, and terrible stuff happening around the world and in our country. And they don't put the spotlight on that because their outrage meters are broken. Their outrage meters need to be recalibrated, and they need to care about things that actually it makes sense to care about. This is one of those stories that in a world that made sense, this would be headline news for a week straight, and every anchor would be screaming about it on every network. Instead, you're lucky if you get a little minute-long mention on the nightly news, and it won't even make it to MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News. But here we are, man. We're doing the same thing over and over. Let's pay our enemies for them to attack us. Oh, and there are people out there who are still hawkish, who are still like, no, these wars are a good idea. If you take that position after knowing all the facts, you're either the dumbest person on the planet or maybe you yourself are also corrupt and you're getting rich from the broken system.